The day he came to fix my sink, my marriage was already leaking from the inside. I just didn't know how deep the crack had gone. He stood there in the doorway, holding a wrench and wearing a look that didn't belong to a stranger. It was calm, certain, like he already knew something about me I was still trying to hide. Maybe he saw it in my eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet begging for someone to notice I was breaking. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch my videos but don't subscribe. It truly means the world when you do. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. So please take a second to subscribe. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that stories really do connect us, no matter where we are. Sometimes the smallest moments, a broken faucet, a stranger's voice, are all it takes for a life to come undone. If stories like this remind you how fragile love and trust can be, subscribe. Because every untold truth deserves to be heard. The morning it began, sunlight came through the blinds in thin, tired lines that never seemed to reach the floor. The kitchen smelled like cold coffee and lemon detergent, that kind of sterile scent that pretends to mean cleanliness, but only reminds you that something's missing. The faucet had been dripping all night, each drop a slow metronome counting the seconds of a marriage that had quietly expired long before the sound began to matter. My husband, Daniel, sat across from me at the table scrolling through his phone, his reflection caught in the dark surface of his untouched coffee. I watched him, waiting for him to look up, to ask me something, anything. But silence had become our language. When the pipe finally gave way under the sink, it wasn't loud. Just a soft, wet gasp, the sound of something giving up. I crouched beside it, watching water pool around my fingers, and felt an unexpected sense of relief. It was something tangible I could fix, a problem with a clear cause and consequence. Not like us. Not like the quiet ache that had settled into my bones. I called the number from a magnet on the fridge, more out of reflex than thought. A man answered, his voice deep, faintly accented, warm in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. "I can come by this afternoon," he said. His name was Marco. By the time he knocked on the door, Daniel had already left for work. The house was too still, too aware of itself. When I opened the door, the afternoon light hit his face, and for a second I forgot why I had called. He was taller than I expected, his shirt slightly unbuttoned from the heat, his hands rough with the kind of work that leaves honesty in the skin. "You called about a leak?" he asked, smiling with one corner of his mouth. I nodded, suddenly conscious of my breath. He stepped inside, his presence filling the space in a way Daniel's hadn't in years. I showed him the sink, apologized for the mess, for the dishes I hadn't done, for the water still dripping. He just shook his head and said, "It's nothing that can't be fixed." His tone was soft but certain, and I felt the words land somewhere deeper than they should have. As he knelt to work, I caught the faint scent of sawdust and soap, the sound of his tools clicking gently against the tiles. The rhythmic motion of his hands, the focus in his face, it was all so strangely intimate. I found myself making coffee just to have something to do with my hands. When I offered him a cup, he looked up at me, and for a moment, I couldn't look away. His eyes weren't the kind that searched. They saw. "You okay?" he asked, just that. Two simple words that felt heavier than the room could hold. I wanted to lie, to say yes, but my throat wouldn't form the sound. Instead, I smiled, a brittle, dishonest smile that must have told him everything. He didn't press. He just nodded once, quietly, as if acknowledging a truth we both understood but didn't dare speak aloud. Daniel called that evening, his voice flat, hurried. He'd be staying late at work again. I said okay, like I always did. When I hung up, the house felt impossibly big. I sat on the floor beside the newly fixed sink, the metal still warm from Marco's touch, and listened to the silence he left behind. It wasn't empty, it was different. Full somehow. Heavy with something unnamed. I ran my hand along the cool tile, tracing the edges of where the water had pooled, and realized how easily damage could spread when ignored. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of dripping was gone, but I kept hearing it in my head, like a memory that refused to fade. I turned over in bed, reaching instinctively for Daniel, but my hand met only the cold indentation of his absence. My heart felt like that faucet, tightly wound, rusted in places, leaking from somewhere unseen. I thought of Marco's eyes, the way he said, "It's nothing that can't be fixed." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe anything could be fixed. The next morning, there was a message from him. Just one line, "Let me know if it leaks again." I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because of what it said, but because of how it felt. Like an invitation. Like someone finally noticed that something had been leaking all along. And maybe, just maybe, they wanted to help me stop it. And for the first time in years, I didn't delete the message. I saved it. He came back 2 days later, just as the morning light broke through the thin kitchen curtains. The air smelled of rain, soft and metallic, and I remember thinking it was strange how everything seemed cleaner before he even touched a thing. The pipe had started leaking again, a slow, defiant drip as if the house itself wanted an excuse to call him back. I told myself it was coincidence. That's all. Just bad plumbing and good timing. But when he walked through the door, smiling like we shared a secret, I knew better. Marco carried his tools in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. "Brought pastries," he said. "You looked like someone who forgets breakfast." I laughed, though it came out more nervous than playful. It had been a long time since someone had noticed something so small about me. He knelt under the sink again, sleeves rolled up, veins flexing as he worked. I stood a few feet away, pretending to check my phone, but watching him instead. The way his fingers moved with quiet precision. The way he hummed under his breath. The way presence seemed to anchor the room. When he asked for the wrench, our hands brushed. Just that, a second of contact, the skin of strangers sparking in the stillness. I pulled back too quickly, pretending not to feel the sudden flush that warmed my face. He noticed. Of course he did. "You okay?" he asked again, just like the first time. And just like before, I couldn't find the words to answer. We ate the pastries at the table afterward, coffee steaming between us. Marco talked about Italy, his small town near the sea, his mother's cooking, the silence of early mornings before the sun hit the rooftops. I listened, holding on to every word, imagining what it would feel like to live in a place where the air didn't feel so heavy. When I told him I'd never been anywhere outside the country, he smiled gently. "Then maybe one day you should," he said. "You look like someone who keeps her world too small," Daniel texted while Marco was still there. Just a few words, meeting ran late. "Don't wait up." I stared at the message, the screen glowing like an accusation. Marco glanced at it, not intrusively, but with the awareness of someone who already knew what it meant. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He stayed longer that day. Said he wanted to make sure the repair would hold. The truth was, I didn't want him to leave, and I think he felt it too. We stood by the sink afterward, close enough that I could smell the faint citrus of his soap. The room seemed to hum between us, the air thick with everything unsaid. "You shouldn't look at me like that," I whispered before I even realized the words had escaped. He stepped back slightly, eyes dark, voice low. "Like what?" "Like you know me." He hesitated, then said, "Maybe I do." Something inside me broke open then, quietly, like a crack spreading under glass. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was recognition. A mirror held up to the version of myself I'd forgotten existed. The woman who still wanted to be seen, not just needed. When he finally left, I walked him to the door. Rain had started again, light and steady, washing over the garden like forgiveness. He paused under the awning, turning back to me with a look that lingered too long. "If it leaks again," he said, "call me." His voice carried something deliberate this time, something that made my pulse stutter. That night, Daniel came home late. The smell of another woman's perfume clung faintly to his shirt, though I told myself I imagined it. He kissed my forehead mechanically, muttered something about work, and disappeared into the shower. I stood there in the kitchen staring at the faucet. It didn't drip, but the silence around it felt deafening. I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through my messages until I found Marco's name. My finger hovered over it, the weight of temptation trembling just above the surface. I didn't text him. I only read his last words again. Let me know if it leaks. 2 nights later, it did. I could have called someone else. There were dozens of plumbers in the city, but my hand dialed his number before my mind had the chance to argue. When he arrived, it wasn't about the sink anymore. He didn't bring his tools this time. Just that same paper bag, 2 coffees, and a look that asked a question neither of us dared say out loud. We stood there in the kitchen, the space between us shrinking like breath before a confession. And when he reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, I didn't step back. I didn't say no. It wasn't the touch itself that undid me. It was the silence afterward. The kind that made me realize I'd already crossed the line long before his lips ever found mine. The first time it truly happened. The sky was gray, that washed-out, colorless kind of gray that makes everything feel suspended, like the world itself is holding its breath. Marco had come by to check the seal on the sink, but we both knew there was nothing left to fix. The repair had held. The leak was me. He stood close enough that I could hear his breathing over the hum of the refrigerator. His eyes searching mine for permission I'd already given in silence. I wish I could say I fought it, that guilt won, that I remembered the vows I'd once whispered under candlelight. But the truth is, when his hands found my waist, the ache inside me quieted for the first time in years. His touch didn't feel like sin. It felt like air, like something I'd been starving for without knowing. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound of it colliding with the roof masking the fragile noises of betrayal. When it was over, we didn't speak. We just sat there side by side on the kitchen floor, the scent of wet air and coffee thick between us. I traced the grain of the tiles beneath my fingertips, the ones he'd repaired weeks ago, and felt the irony sting deep. Things break, you fix them, and sometimes you pretend the cracks never happened. But people, we don't fix the same way. We leak, we overflow, we drown. He left before dawn, slipping out through the back gate. I watched the faint red of his taillights fade into the mist and felt something collapse quietly inside me. Not regret, not yet. Just the knowledge that I had stepped into a version of myself I couldn't unsee. The next morning, Daniel was home early. He brought flowers, the kind he used to buy when we first married, before love turned into scheduling. I stared at them on the counter, their scent too sweet, too loud. "What's this for?" I asked. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just because." Those 2 words hit harder than any accusation could have. Just because it was too late for reasons. Too late for gestures that arrived after silence had already built a home in our bed. I thanked him, pretended to smile, and hated myself for the way my heart didn't move. Days turned into weeks. Marco and I slipped into a rhythm, stolen hours, muted laughter, words whispered in places where walls could keep secrets. He'd show up when Daniel was gone, fixing things that didn't need fixing. A loose screw here, a creak in the cabinet there. I began to crave the sound of his truck outside the house, the soft click of his boots on the floor. But with every visit, guilt pressed harder against the edges of what we were building. He'd sometimes look at me like he wanted to say something honest, something heavy. But he never did. Maybe because he knew the truth would break whatever fragile piece we had left. Then one night, everything unraveled. It was raining again, the kind of relentless storm that shakes the windows and drowns the city. Marco was there, sitting on the counter, his shirt damp from the downpour. We talked about nothing and everything, about his plans to go back to Italy, about how tired I was of pretending my life was fine. The storm outside echoed the one in my chest. I don't know what time it was when I heard the car door slam. Daniel wasn't supposed to be home. His meetings never ended before midnight. But the sound of his footsteps across the porch froze me in place. Marco's eyes met mine, wide, silent, pleading. The door opened. For a moment, time fractured. 3 people caught in the same heartbeat of realization. Daniel's gaze moved from me to Marco, to the half-empty wine glasses, to the open buttons of my blouse. His face didn't twist in anger at first, just disbelief, like his mind was trying to rewrite what his eyes refused to accept. "Who is he?" he asked. His voice was so calm it terrified me. No one spoke. Not me, not Marco. The silence said everything. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the steady dripping from the faucet. The one that had started all of this? The water tapped against the sink, soft but endless, and Daniel's eyes flicked toward it. He laughed once, bitter and low, shaking his head. "Figures," he muttered. "It was always about fixing things, wasn't it?" He walked out without another word. The door slammed, and the echo swallowed the house whole. Marco reached for me, but I stepped back. The look on his face, guilt, tenderness, confusion, all of it blurred together until it was unbearable. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I know," I whispered. "So am I." He left that night, and I didn't stop him. When the rain finally eased, I sat on the kitchen floor again, the tiles cold against my skin, the steady drip returning like a metronome marking what was left of my life. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, mixed with the flowers Daniel had left wilting in the corner. Everything I'd tried to repair had flooded. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and silence. Daniel's closet was empty, his toothbrush gone. The bed felt larger than ever. And when I went to the kitchen, the faucet was leaking again, one slow, deliberate drop at a time. In the weeks that followed, the house stopped feeling like mine. Every sound seemed to echo longer. Every room held its breath as if waiting for footsteps that would never come back. Daniel's absence wasn't loud. It was methodical. Bills still arrived with his name, his coffee mug still sat on the shelf, but the life that once filled those things had evaporated. Even his scent disappeared from the sheets faster than I expected. Love fades slower than that. Guilt doesn't. I spent the first few days pretending. I opened curtains that didn't need opening, cooked meals no one would eat, left the television running just to drown the silence. Marco didn't call. I told myself I wouldn't have answered if he did, but I checked my phone every morning anyway. Each vibration made my heart jolt. Each silence cut deeper. By the 3rd week, even the phone stopped pretending to care. The sink began leaking again. A single drop every few minutes, steady and mocking. I stared at it one night, sitting on the kitchen floor with my knees pulled to my chest, the same place where everything had started. The sound was hypnotic, that soft, rhythmic drip echoing through the quiet. It was like the house was reminding me of every mistake I'd tried to bury. So I decided to fix it myself. It wasn't about the pipe, not really. It was about control, about trying to claim something small in a world that had spun out of mine. I watched a video tutorial, took apart the faucet with trembling hands, the metal cold and stubborn under my grip. My fingers slipped once, cutting against the edge of a wrench, and I watched a thin line of blood appear. The sight of it startled me, not for the pain, but because it reminded me I was still here. Still bleeding, still trying. I replaced the washer, tightened the valve, turned the water back on. The sound stopped. For the first time in months, silence felt like peace. I leaned against the counter, breathing slowly, realizing how strange it was that something so simple could feel like redemption. Later that night, I found one of Marco's notes in a drawer, a small slip of paper he'd used to jot down a parts number. His handwriting was strong, deliberate, with tiny imperfections that made it human. Beneath the numbers, almost as if he'd written it without thinking, were 2 words: "Take care." I sat there staring at it until the edges softened under my fingers. He had fixed what he came to fix. The rest had been my doing. Our doing. And now all that was left were ghosts of moments that had once felt alive. Daniel didn't return my calls. Not for weeks. When he finally did, his voice was distant, polite. He asked about the house, about bills, never about me. "I hope you're doing okay," he said before hanging up. I wanted to tell him I wasn't, that I didn't know how to be, that every sound in the house felt like a confession. But the words stayed behind my teeth. Some nights I drive past Marco's workshop. The lights are still on sometimes, faint through the dirty windows. I never go in. I just sit there for a while, watching the shadow of him moving inside, doing what he does best, repairing broken things. I wonder if he ever thinks of me. I wonder if he hates himself for not walking away sooner. The truth is, I don't hate either of them. Not anymore. Love and guilt are built from the same material. They both cling, they both corrode. You can't wash one away without feeling the other. The house has grown quieter now. I've painted the kitchen walls, replaced the curtains, even planted basil on the windowsill. Every morning I water it, and the smell fills the air. Green, clean, new. Sometimes I catch myself humming, the way Marco used to when he worked. It doesn't hurt the way it used to. It just reminds me that I was alive once. Recklessly, painfully alive. A few days ago, I heard a knock at the door. My heart jumped before my mind could stop it. When I opened it, it was just a delivery man dropping off a parcel I didn't remember ordering. But for a split second, the shape of his shadow against the light looked familiar. It was enough to make my hands shake again. That night, as I stood in the kitchen rinsing the dishes, I noticed something small. The faintest sound, barely there. A drip. One single drop echoing in the sink. I tightened the tap and it stopped. I smiled. It wasn't about fear anymore. It wasn't about him or Daniel or what I'd done. It was about knowing that not everything broken has to be replaced. Some things just need attention, care, honesty. Sometimes I still wake up at night and think I hear water running. But when I check, it's always dry. The house is still, the air soft, and for the first time in years, the silence doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like forgiveness. And maybe that's the truest kind of repair there is. Not fixing what's gone, but learning how to live with what remains.